Doc, I got this recurring nightmare of me in Game 7, World Series, hitting a homer to win it, only to be called out for missing home plate. And we lose the game in extra innings. Am I nuts? No, just a normal Cleveland fan. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. And today, as always, with spring training and baseball season beckoning us, calling us from our long winter slumber, I figured I would do just like I did last week, highlight some baseball history or theme or book. And in this case, I'd like to do a history of the Cleveland baseball franchise, which has not had a lot of winning teams, but they've had some interesting seasons nonetheless. And I'd like to take a look at them. And as I said in the cartoon before we went, if you're a Cleveland fan, boy, you haven't won a World Series since 1948. And you had only been in a World Series before the 90s in 1920 with Tris Speaker leading the Cleveland Indians. That was a series in which the only unassisted triple play was made by Bill Wamsgas. And then you had the 1954 team that won 111 games and then lost 4 straight to the New York Giants with, of course, the great catch of Vic Wertz by the great Willie Mays. And sandwiched between that, you had the 1948 team, which I have discovered is really an interesting group of players, an interesting season, 1948. And that Cleveland team, now I wonder why they didn't win more. So maybe I can figure out some of the theories why, or give reasons as to why they didn't win more today, just analyzing some of the players, some of the history of that 48 season. You know that Cleveland and Boston tied on the last day of the regular season and then played an extended season game, a playoff game in which the Indians at Fenway Park basically dismantled the Red Sox early and then won the pennant and a trip to the World Series where they defeat another Boston team, the Boston Braves. And, here's what I was starting to look at. So I'm going over the roster of the players. The team, of course, was led by player manager Lou Boudreau. And I always thought, until I did some investigating on this particular episode, I always thought he was just named manager either that year or the year before. Turned out, and I didn't know this, and this is one of the reasons I do the show, is that, quote unquote, although I may know quite a bit about sports history, I'm not an expert. I'm not the be-all and end-all go-to guy for all things baseball, football, basketball, hockey. I like to learn on this program as well. And that being stated, Boudreau was the Cleveland manager for quite a bit of time. I think he was named manager in 1940. Then I was looking back, and I wanted to see he is the last player manager and probably the last ever. This is why this 48 team is so interesting. Boudreau will probably be the last player manager ever to win a world title. Before that, it had been done in 1935 and in 1920 by Tris Speaker of the Cleveland Indians. In fact, Speaker had an 8.6 WAR that year. And just to be honest with you, WAR is something I like. It's not something that I feel is the be-all and end-all. I feel it's another tool to measure usually players that are overlooked. But I also question sometimes the WAR as well, because as I've pointed out numerous times on this show, I can compile guys with the same stats. I can compile guys who had better years, making an all-star team, being awarded a Gold Glove or winning the Silver Slugger Award, and yet having a lower WAR than the previous year. With this team of Cleveland, the Indians of 1948, here's what's fascinating. I was going through their top players that year. Lou Boudreau had Lou Boudreau had an unbelievable year, 1948. He makes the All-Star team. He wins the MVP, and he fashions a season where he had a 10.4 to lead everybody in the American League. played 152 of the 155 games. He had 199 hits with 34 doubles, 6 triples, 18 home runs, 106 RBIs, and scored 116 runs while hitting 355 and drawing 98 walks. His on-base percentage, this is what I always like to say. I always think that an on-base percentage, I guess 100 points higher than your batting average is really unbelievable season. So I would say maybe 50 points higher than your batting average. Lou Boudreau's on-base percentage that year with the 98 walks was .453. That's incredible. And it didn't lead the league because 1948, just think, Boston fans, who might have led the league in on-base percentage? I don't think you can go so far as the Boston Red Sox and listed as Teddy Ballgame Ted Williams, who was one of the guys I highlighted in last week's baseball card book. And on top of this, it's really remarkable because Boudreau, when you think about it, it's got to be one of the greatest managerial jobs ever done. Why? Because the Indians were tied on the last day of the season. So that means that they had to play another game, basically a playoff game, even though it goes to the regular season. Had to win that game on the road in Fenway Park. And then play Boston's other team, the Boston Braves, and that went to 6 games. So you have Boudreau, All-Star, MVP for the season, leading the team to the World Series. Find me a greater season all around of any player. Now you can, I often say maybe Frank Robinson, 1966 with the Triple Crown, finishing it off with a World Series victory. But this is just unbelievable. And the thing is, Boudreau was not beloved necessarily by his Cleveland teammates. In fact, I was reading a Sabre story about him, and I was just getting the gist of it, so I'm not going to go into the details. But basically, Boudreau had a number of seasons, had some winning, mostly losing or mediocrity with Cleveland, had been called away to fight in World War II. So that kind of hurt maybe the transition as a manager, playing and managing at the same time. But Bill Veeck had wanted to get rid of him. And actually, he had 3 players who had gone in to see him saying they could do a better job as the player manager for the Indians. So he was really under the gun, not just by management, the front office, but by players sitting on the bench. And then he was saying, when you made an error for one particular player, Jim Bagby Jr., he just let you know it. And in fact, he was one of the guys who used to remark to Boudreau after he made an error or did something wrong, why don't you go back to college? They used to call him the college boy and all the rest of it. And Boudreau the Indians kind of changed that atmosphere. They unloaded Bagby. Actually, Bagby was not a bad pitcher. He finished one game over 500. He was 98 and 97 or 97 and 96. But he won like 3 times. Actually, I'll give you his record right here. Bagby won 17 games twice for the Indians in 1942 and 43. Yes, they were war years. Once they came back, though, looks like by age 27 he was done because he fashions a collective over those 4 seasons. He's out of the game by age 30. He went 24 and 26 with the Indians from 1941 to 44. He actually was 34, 38, 47, and 43 with the Indians, but he led the league in innings pitched with 273 in 1943 when he made one of his 2 All-Star teams and actually finished 20th in the MVP voting. And the year before he was an All-Star, fashioning a 17-9 record, a better year, 2.96 ERA as opposed to 3.10, and then finishing 23 in the MVP. But he was gone from that 48 team, actually out of baseball by 1947. So I think that getting rid of him, injuries, and maybe just letting him go in terms of his contract, the Indians did addition by subtraction by getting rid of a guy who really razzed Boudreau. And in fact, Boudreau said he had to be one of the nastiest guys he ever played with in Major League history. But here's the deal, and this is what I want to get to with this Cleveland Indian team. Boudreau had a 10.4 WAR. He had two other teammates, Joe Gordon, who had come over from the Yankees, a great player. And once again, I think that this program has allowed me to really investigate guys I had heard about, but because they were Yankees, never really much bothered with. But this has forced me to learn about these players even more so. So very appreciative of the research part of this program. Joe Gordon had a 6.5 WAR. Now, just be patient with me. Bob Lemon, their right-handed pitcher who would lead the Yankees to the 78 World Championship, 6.4 WAR. And Kenny Keltner, who had his finest season in 1948. And, of course, Keltner was the one who put the kibosh on Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak, making some sensational plays to end the 56-game hitting streak of Joe DiMaggio. People don't realize the next day DiMaggio started a 21-game hitting streak. So Keltner prevented him from having almost an 80-game hitting streak. But Keltner had his finest season in 1948 with a 6 WAR. So you had collectively four guys who had a 6.0 WAR or higher. Now, I make this point because I did an investigation of just the World Series winners going all the way back to 1903. Only two teams had more players with a 6.0 WAR or higher than that Cleveland Indian roster of 1948. That was the 1927 Yankees of Ruth and Gehrig, seen as probably the greatest team ever assembled. Now you know why. They had five players. Ready for this? Ruth had a 12.6, Gehrig 11.9, Earl Coombs 7.1, Tony Lazzari 6.4, and Waite Hoyt 6.1 as the five guys with a 6 or higher WAR. And then you have the 1937 Yankees. This was Lefty Gomez and DiMaggio and Lou Gehrig and Bill Dickey and Red Ruffing. Red Ruffing, 6.1. Dickey, 6.5. Gehrig, 8.2. And this is 8.2. This is 2 years before really Gehrig had to hang him up because of Lou Gehrig's disease. DiMaggio, 8.4, as he was just coming into his prime, you could say. And Lefty Gomez, a 9, a solid 9. And they did tie, ready for this, the Philadelphia A's of 1930. Now, those were 1929, excuse me. That athletic team had won 104 games, 46 losses under Connie Mack. Only 46 losses, 104 wins. And not only that, ready for this, their top players, Al Simmons, 7.9. Jimmy Fox, 7.9, tied. They had Lefty Gomez, another lefty, Lefty Gomez with a 7.4, and Rube Wahlberg, 6.4, another great pitcher on that team. Wahlberg actually won 18 games that year. Lefty won 20. Together, obviously, they were 38-17. That Lefty Grove had a 2.81 ERA and led the league in winning percentage at 769. But they had won 97 games, 98. In fact, I was looking, they had a 625 winning percentage, that Cleveland Indian team. Had they played 162 games, they would have won 104 games that year. So you're talking about a heck of a ball club. Actually, here is their team. Jim Hegan, whose son Mike would play for the Seattle Pilots. Eddie Robinson played first base. He had 16 homers, 83 RBIs, hit 254, had a 307 on-base percentage as he drew 36 walks. Hegan had a fine season, 1461, 248. Joe Gordon, Hall of Famer, finished 6th in the MVP. Actually, the Indians, that team, that 1948 team, had 5 guys finish in the top 30 MVP, and they had 2 guys in the top 10 and 4 guys in the top 20. So they had a remarkable season. That's why I'm trying to figure out all this. Their outfield was okay. They had Dale Mitchell, Well, they had Ken Keltner. Let me just finish this. Playing great ball over at third base. Had a monster year, his best season ever. 31 homers, 119 RBIs, 297. And then his career, actually, after that, he was age 31. And today, probably in the era of Moneyball, he was done. In 49, I think he gets hurt. He only played 80 games, 8 homers, 30 RBIs, 232 batting average. And then he's traded to Cleveland. And even though he gets traded to Boston in 1950, he only played 13 games, did hit 321, but his career was done. So his pinnacle season in baseball happened to come at just the right moment. And I'm starting to think that this 48 Indian team, everything just hit at the right moment for this ball club, because Keltner was an all-star in 44, 43, 42, 41, 40, and 1946. Never drove 100 runs in until 1948. His highest was 97 in 1939, and interestingly, did get MVP votes. But that, I'm sorry. With Cleveland at age 21, he drove in 113. But then he had that great freshman year, because he did play like one game the year before. His rookie year drove in 113 and never got close to that, with the exception of 97 RBIs in all those years after that, until basically his final great season at age 31 in 1948. So you have Keltner. And then Bob Lemon was just beginning, I would say, his Hall of Fame career. He was a 7-time All-Star. He fashioned a 207 and 128 record with a 3.23 ERA. His WAR is only 48.2. Kind of interesting. He lost 3 years for military, from 43 to 45. When he came back, 1946 was 4-5, and then from 47, actually I'm going to say from 1948 all the way up until 1956, he really goes gangbusters. Actually, his first 20-win season comes in 1948. That's what I'm saying. It's almost as if this whole ball club had their best years or hit that maturity level like a Bob Lemon, where now you can count on him being this all-star Hall of Fame pitcher for the next several years. And then this 48 team just came together. It's really a fascinating story with them. So Lemon wins 20, goes 20 and 14, 2.82 ERA, 22 and 49, wins 23 in 1950. In 51, he won 17. He's back to 22 wins, actually doubled. Had a 667 winning percentage, won 22 games with 11 setbacks, 21 and 15, 54, the Indians' greatest winning season with the most wins, 111, until it was surpassed by the Yankees and the Seattle Mariners. He won 23 games to lead the league. His ERA was 2.72. Interestingly enough, he won 23 games, pitching his fewest innings since his first full year in 1947. Lemon only pitched 250 only. I'm saying this. He only pitched 258 innings when he won the 23 games with a 2.72 ERA. Completed 21 games, so it wasn't like he was going 5 innings and being taken out with the win. I mean, he completed 21 of the 23 games he won. Actually, 21 of the 33 games that he started. Actually, he had 3 no decisions. So this guy was legit, and yet pitched only 258 innings. And why I say that is the year before, the preceding year, 286, 309, 263, 288, 279, and 293 innings pitched. And in those years, 4 times he led the league. His final 2 seasons, he was 18 and 10, 211 innings with a 3.88 ERA. And then 1956, his last great season, age 35, 20 wins, 14 losses, 3.03 ERA, 255 innings pitched. So in that year, ready for this? Lemon, this is why he's a Hall of Famer, made the All-Star team all those years. He finished in the MVP voting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years during that run. He finished in the top 10 5 times. He finished in the top 5 3 times. And in 1948, he was the MVP. He was 5th, finishing behind Lou Boudreau. And then the other guy who I really want to highlight here is Joe Gordon, who is amazing. And here's the thing with Joe Gordon. In 1939, with the New York Yankees, they had 3 guys with WARs of 6 or more. Joe Gordon was one of them. This guy was a really solid Hall of Famer. I know he played on some great teams, but, do you play on great teams or do you make great teams great? And I think him going to Cleveland from the Yankees showed he was really a great player. Probably, like I've been doing all my life, probably overlooked him. He finished with a 55.6 WAR, drove in 975 RBIs. Remember, he's a second baseman, and drove in over 100 runs in his career 4 times. Guess what he did? 1948, at the age of 33, even though he makes the All-Star team in 49 with 20 homers, 84 RBIs, and a 251 average, he has the single greatest output of power in his career. I would argue that. He had 21 doubles, 4 triples, had 154 hits, maybe not so much with the hit, as many hits as he had with the Yankees, 173 in 1940. But in 1948, he scores 96 runs, hits 32 home runs, the most in his career. Drives in 124, the most in his career. Hits a solid 280. But ready for this? Drew 77 walks to give him an on-base percentage of .371, almost 100 points, higher than his batting average. That year, ready for this? Here's how great a player Gordon was. And again, he's overlooked because of the great Yankee teams he played for. He was an MVP. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He was in the running for MVP in 8 of his years in the major leagues. He finished in the top 10 4, 5 times, and he finished in the top, he was MVP, obviously, in 1942 when he hit 18 homers, 103 RBIs, similar to like Lou Boudreau in 1948 with a .322 average. Why do I say that? Well, Boudreau in 1948, remember, 18, 103, .322, playing a middle infield position. Boudreau that year, 18, 106, better batting average by far, .355 batting average. Very close. Very close. And I almost think it's like, wow, 4 guys just all of a sudden, Lemon finally reaching that maturity level that he needed, finally reaching that talent level that potential that they thought about him. Joe Gordon in the twilight of his career, along with Ken Keltner, producing their best numbers in terms of offensive output. And of course, Lou Boudreau finally probably having maybe the luxury of getting rid of players that were just a pain to him, and then having the luxury of having all these players just melding together. And there's one other thing on that 48 team that has to be said, and that was also that Cleveland team, unlike the Jackie Robinson team of 1947, won the World Series by having the first African-American player in American League history when they asked Larry Doby to come up and play for the Cleveland Indian Ball Club, coming up from the Negro Leagues. And this is funny, but I calculated Doby's WAR. He only had a 4.6. Had he played the whole year, he played 121 games, had 500 exactly plate appearances. Ready for this? Now he's 24. All right. So he's starting to come into his prime. Remember, he was a great player in the Negro Leagues and all the rest of it. He had 23 doubles, 9 triples, 14 homers, 66 RBIs, which placed him 4th on the team in RBIs. And he hit .301 and drew 54 walks to have a .384 on-base percentage, almost 100 points higher. In fact, this whole team was just incredible that way. Really, Jim Hegan, Well, Jim Hegan and Eddie Robinson, not so much. But you're talking about Joe Gordon, 280, 371, almost 100 points. You're talking about Lou Boudreau, 355 to 453. You're talking Ken Keltner, who did have 297 to 395, almost 100 points higher. And then you have Larry Doby, 301 to 384 on base percentage. To wit, they had they had three guys draw 70 more walks on that team. Now, why do I say all this? Well, one, I think the players have to be saluted. And it didn't look like they had too much of a bench, the Indians, that year, considering that Hegan played 144 games as a catcher, maybe as a pinch hitter. You had Eddie Robinson at first base, 134, so he missed 20 games. Joe Gordon only missed 10 with 144. Boudreau basically played everything, 152. Ken Keltner played 153. Dale Mitchell, he's a guy, also is in World Series legend as being the final out in The Perfect Game by Don Larson. He fashioned a pretty good season. He only had a 3. Actually, probably the Indians' weakest link was the fact that they didn't have a great outfield. Collectively, the 3 guys who saw the most action hit only 19 home runs, 14, of course, by Doby. But they did drive in over 100 runs. Actually, they drove in 12, 21, 2, 140 some odd runs. Not bad for the outfield. And they did hit 336, 301, and 260. The only other guy who played, let's say, part-time that I would consider 2 utility players were Allie Clark, an outfielder, 9 homers, 38 RBIs. They got production. Don't misunderstand me. But it wasn't like, in 77 and 78, I always talk about this. The Yankees had unbelievable players coming off the bench. The Yankees of the 50s had unbelievable players coming off the bench. They were okay, many of these players. Would never see, really, with the exception of maybe Ray Boone and Al Rosen, but they only played 5 and 6 games each. So they missed really that 48th season. But yeah, they were future great players for the franchise, but they were waiting in the wings. This team, for whatever reason, and why I say this is because they won 97 games and never really get to the pennant again until 1954 with a totally different ball club. And that 54 team, ready for this? Actually, ready for this? I'm going to keep going over the schedule because I think it's important. This team drew 2.6 million fans. That 54 team drew only 1.3. And I was looking. They had 18 doubleheaders, the 54 team, 9 home, 9 away. The biggest crowd that the 54 team drew was in September, when they were about 8 games in front of the Yankees, and they had the Yankees in for a doubleheader. The Indians really didn't draw. How do I say this without? They drew okay. They had a couple of crowds of, let's say, 39,000, 40,000, 28,000. I know it's a different with the New York Yankees on Friday, June 25th, 26th, and 27th. It's the 54 team. They drew 49, 46, and 47,000 for the games, and they lost 2 of the 3 games to the Yankees, won 11-0 on Friday night. But then the only other, they drew 58,000 for a Wednesday game against the Yankees and won that game 5-2 with Bob Lemon. This is the 54 team now. They drew 58 and they drew 60,000 against the Yankees, losing the game before 2-1. Whitey Ford winning that game. But then they drew 50,000 August 10th and lost that game. Ned Garver, a very good pitcher, beating Early Wynn. This is 1954, remember. And then the biggest games they had the Yankees in again and drew 58, 43, and 39. Those are all great. And then the apex game was New York in a doubleheader, and they swept the Yankees on a Sunday, September 12th. That game, that doubleheader drew 84,000 to the ballpark. Now, why do I say this? I was really
surprised that they only drew 1.3 because it wasn't like that Yankee team, that Cleveland team was, let's say, winning in succession 48, 49, 50, 51. You're talking about almost a decade, 6 years from their last championship. Consider this: the 48 Indian team, which remember hadn't won a pennant since 1920, they were drawing huge crowds right away. In fact, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, April 23rd, 24th, and 25th, they drew over 40,000 fans for the 3 games against the Tigers, winning all 3. They drew 45, 41, 48. They go on the road, don't draw as well on the road. Come home and draw 52,000 and then 57 against the Detroit Tigers. Oh, excuse me, I got to take that back. In Detroit, opening season, April 23, 24, 25, over 120,000 see the Cleveland Indians play at Detroit. They come back to Saturday, May 1st, they face Detroit, and they draw over 109,000 fans and lose both games. Bob Feller and Bob Lemon losing both games in 1948. Can you believe that? Bob Feller, not even one of the war guys with a 6-0. He was just coming back. And then they draw in succession over 40,000 fans, or average over 40,000 fans, playing the White Sox, the A's, and Boston in May. Then they drew 78,000. This is the 48 team for a Sunday double dip against the New York Yankees again. They split with the Yankees, losing 6-5 and then besting the Pinstripers 5-1. And then they have 2 games, this Cleveland team, June 10th, and then a Saturday doubleheader. They drew over 135,000 people to the 3-game set with the Yankees, and then finish up with 49,000 on Sunday, June 13th. So against the Yankees, they drew 160,000, but it was 60,000, 67,000, 68,000. And then they draw, this is the Indians, 82,000 for a Sunday doubleheader against the Philadelphia A's and sweep them, scoring 14 runs in the process, 4-3 and 10-0 to sweep the A's. They're in the 50s again, 41,000. I think you can see. And then they drew back-to-back 132 plus against the New York Yankees. Boy, they should have just played the Yankees all year. Then they drew 60,000 against Philadelphia. Excuse me, actually, that 4,000, that was at Yankee Stadium. Now, let me get this right. Against Boston, Sunday doubleheader in Cleveland, drew 70,000, followed by 72,000, and then 71,000 for a game against the Yankees on August 6th. The Saturday afternoon game between those 3 juggernaut games, only 13,000. And then 73, 56, they drew 51, 45. So this 48 Indian team, again, they are not really visited or looked at. I know they're the last championship team for the Indians in their franchise history. But I think when people think of the Cleveland franchise dating way back, they think of the 54 team rather than the 48 ball club. And this 48 ball club had nothing to be ashamed of. And then finally, here's the deal. It's a great, great pennant race. And it comes down to the one game in Fenway Park. The Red Sox are playing them neck and neck. By the way, that team with Boston, Ted Williams on that ball club, ready for this? He had a WAR of 8.3. Nobody else on the club was even close to him. Bobby Doerr had a 5.1. Vern Stevens had a 4.6. So again, even though Williams had an incredible year, led the league in on-base percentage, batting average, walks, doubles, had 44 doubles, Williams, 25 homers, 127 RBIs, 126 walks, 369 batting average, 497 on base percentage, and finished third. It would have been interesting. Would he have won the MVP? I know A lot of people out there don't like doing the ifs. I love it. But had they won, would Williams have been the MVP over Boudreau? Would have been very interesting. Let me just get back to that final series. Ready for this? Starting with September 1st, they were up a game and a half. Actually, I'm going to put it back to Sunday, August 22nd. They were up 3 going into a doubleheader. By the end of the week, or by Tuesday, August 24th, Boston beat them in a walk-off game 9-8. In fact, I'm going to give you the box score. And Boston cut the lead to half a game. In that game, Larry Doby had a triple, his 6th of the year. Boudreau had a double. Dale Mitchell had his 25th double of the year. Dom DiMaggio had a home run. Vern Stevens had a home run. Ted Williams was 1 for 5 with an RBI in that ball game. All right. So the Red Sox take the lead. Then they lose 9-0. Then they're down again by a half game. Then they go up. Then they're down by 1 game, even though they beat the Yankees. Then they lose to the Yankees. So they're still in second place, 1 game down. Then on Saturday, August 28th, they fall 2 games behind, and they stay there until they can cut it to a game and a half. Then they're back to 2 games as we enter September. Long story short, the lead by Boston balloons to 4.5 games on Wednesday, September 8th. Even though they win a walk-off, I hate that term. Even though they win the game 8-7, actually they won, ready for this, they won 2 walk-off games against Detroit in successive nights. Beat them 8-7 and then beat them 3-2 and still don't get close. They finally nibble at the lead a little bit by winning their 3rd straight over Detroit, winning 10-1. They win 6 straight to cut the lead to 2.5 with a September 12th first game doubleheader win. So they cut it to 2.5. Then they lose 2 straight, fall back 4 games. 4 games behind on Tuesday, September 14th. They finally tie the Red Sox on September 22nd and stay tied for the next 3 games. Then they go up by as many as 2. Then they are up by 1 on Saturday, October 2nd, before the Red Sox tie them on the very last day of the season with as the Indians lost 7-1. And then on Monday, October 4th, the Cleveland Indians defeat the Red Sox 8-3. Both teams scored a run in the opening frame, and then in the 5th and 6th innings, or actually in the 4th inning, Cleveland erupted for 4 runs, tack on solo runs in the 5th, 8th, and 9th inning. They were led by Lou Boudreau, MVP, player manager, who went 4 for 4 with 3 runs scored, 2 RBIs, a 2-run home run in that ball game, as he ended off Denny Galehouse in the 1st inning. And Kenny Keltner hit his 31st and drove in, had another hit with a double. And Larry Doby had 2 doubles, both off Ellis Kinder, his 22nd and 23rd double of the year. That was just the beginning. It ignited for the Indians. They would go on and defeat the Boston Braves 4-2. And that will be covered in another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This is Will O'Toole recounting the 1948 baseball season of the Cleveland Indians, the last pennant-winning team in Cleveland history to also win the World Series, and also the very last time a player-manager leads his team to the World Series crown. That man, Lou Boudreau. Thanks for joining me. See you next week with another edition.